Okay, so today we move on to a new text. We're gonna read Porphyry's sentence 32, which is, as it were, his attempt to systematize what Plotinus says on virtue. So the sentences, sometimes you see them translated as like launching points to the intelligible. They they're these short texts. Sometimes it's just one or two of like sometimes just a single sentence. Sometimes it's a few paragraphs like this one. Often it's just a quote or an excerpt from Plotinus. Sometimes it's something more, personal, more organized, like this one, where he's clearly tidying up the material that he finds in Plotinus, and there are also some important distinctions. He makes some moves that Plotinus doesn't make. But anyway, so this text will itself serve as a recap for what we saw when we read Plotinus 1-2. And in but just to remind ourselves of what we went through with Plotinus, so just now with 3-4. So what 3-4 on our allotted guardian demon um, did was that first of all it showed us, as it were, a cosmological picture, what's the cosmological function of the virtue theory, right? It explains how soul can be the cause of everything in the cosmos by showing that it can be all these different things. It can be better and worse and so on.
Mm-hmm.
It also showed us, it also pointed to what seems to be, but I mean, Plotinus didn't really spell what this is, spell it out, but it what seems to be perhaps some horizons uh, of, of the scales of virtue that aren't dealt with in on virtue. So he talks about about a soul possibly becoming a god, and he also distinguishes between the many different um, uh, between like the souls that go to different heavenly spheres. So there seems to be like distinctions that didn't exist in On Virtue. We also saw the role of the daimon in moral action, right? So it acts as this. There's always this higher standard that we can aspire to, right? And that seems to be essential to understanding action for Plotinus. So, and we also saw, just how he interprets many of these Platonic texts. Now, for for Porphyry, so in this text, he doesn't talk that much about. Doesn't talk. Yeah, there's this one important mention of daimon, but in general, he doesn't talk about it. Um, and um, but maybe after once we finish this text, I'll bring something of Porphyry on Daimonis. But in general, here we'll just see a summary on of 1-2, and that will be a recap for us. And so what we're doing as we read these texts, that we're seeing uh, the full theory that we get like later in Damascus slowly take shape. Um, so but since this is just a recap of Plotinus, I don't really have slides today because there's no background to give you because it's the same background that we saw before. So we're just gonna read the text together today, right? So if you'd like, you can start by reading the first paragraph.
Wait, that did you send me the text? Because I
I
don't know.
did.
Yeah, but
I
I
sent
tried
it
to
like
open it and it's not. Could you send it again, maybe? Because it's not.
sure.
My computer, the WhatsApp doesn't. I don't know. Sometimes it
Oh, okay. I'll
goes
send
on.
you. I'll send you the text again. Um, so I'll send you the full text. Okay, and then I'll send you just the chapter because.
Mm,
make sure, hopefully one of the two um, things will work.
okay. Yeah, the previous PDF that you sent is not okay. Here it is. Yeah. Porphyry, 32. The virtues, right? Okay. Let me put it
Yeah.
here. Let me put it somewhere where I can. Okay. Um, make it bigger. The virtue of the human being, the virtues of the human being at the civic level are one thing, and those of the human being who is raising himself up towards the contemplative state, and who for this reason termed, and who is for this reason termed uh, contemplative, are another. So there's two different virtues. There's the civic level, and then there's this raising up to the contemplative state, and they have different virtues. Then there's a third thing, and different again are those of the human being who is already a perfected contemplative and who already practices contemplation. So he also has a virtue, but that's different. He's not raising himself up. It's the next beyond virtue, sort of, beyond contemplation or something more than that. And different again are those of the intellect, insofar as it is intellect and transcends soul.
Okay. Um, thanks. So this is how he opens this this discussion. And is he's going to have just as a matter of structure, so he's going to have the first part where he's going to go through each of these four kinds of virtue, and then he's going to end with some like general considerations about all the virtues. And then he'll have a second part, which is specifically about this second class, those that are raising themselves up towards the contemplative state. As he'll explain
Hmm.
later, these are what's also called the purifying virtues, and the ones to do with
Okay.
purification. We already see here one important difference from Plotinus, because Plotinus really wanted to keep virtue as the name for what the soul has, right? And so he often returned to this that in intellect there might be the like the paradigms for the virtues, but those aren't virtues because virtue implies something that you acquire, right? The soul acquires step by step. But Porphyry has no problem talking about the virtues of intellect. If this is semantic or something real, I mean, we'll have to see. Like if it indicates some real difference of position, we'll see later that there are a couple of indications that it might be actually something more than just that. Oh, he's comfortable using the word this way. And also with regard to the Greek, so um, yeah, one thing that the translators flag, and it's good of them that they do here when in the last sentence, is that different yet again are those of the intellect, insofar as it is intellect and transcends soul. Here, the word that is transcends is pure, katharos, right? So it would be pure of soul. Of course, transcends soul can is certainly it's certainly part of the of what he's talking about, that these are proper to intellect distinct from soul. But by saying purifying or purified, it makes it seem like this is the same step that you went from one to two and then from three to four. So that's just a um, yeah. That's just a way of thinking about that. It just also occurred to me now that I said one to two and three to four, that you
Mm.
have here four steps in proportion. You could ask, is this like the divided line? Um, I think maybe and like that might be informing why he's decided to include these models of virtues as virtues of intellect, as virtues of nous. Um, Maybe, although it doesn't really map on because the lowest level of the divided line is just mere appearances, and if you have political virtue, you're already judging, things as they are with your dianoia. And also, yeah, all and so like you could, yeah, so it's not really, the 1, 2, 3, 4 might remind you of the divided line, but I think um that would not be a fruitful way to a fruitful path to explore. Um okay, so now he turns to the first these
So,
civic virtues.
just to be clear, the first virtue is the republic virtue. The second one is the like raise in the I'm not sure how we called it before, like the
So the first virtue are the republic virtues. The second virtues are the Phaedo virtues, right? The those that are connected with purification. And the third virtues are contemplative. And in Plotinus, we saw this discussion about one thing is to purify yourself, and the other is to turn towards nous. And it was there was some confusion here about, they're two distinct things, but they happen somehow at the same time, but still they're two different things in Plotinus. And then the fourth are in Plotinus, they were just the models in intellect, right? So, for instance, intellect self-identity is what you're trying to emulate when you're trying to be somehow true to yourself or something like that. Those weren't virtues in Plotinus; they were just models and intellect of the virtues. But here they're called virtues.
it's like the virtue of intellect itself or something like that.
Yeah, those features of intellect that we're imitating when we acquire virtues.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Um, and so now he starts, discussing each of these levels one by one. So first, and what he's going to do with each of these, and so he's more systematic than Plotinus, that first he gives, as it were, a short general discussion, and then he sees in each of them what are the four cardinal virtues in that level. Like, so what is wisdom here? What is courage? What is temperance? What is justice?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so let's first read the what he calls here is the civic virtues, which in other contexts are called the political virtues, right? It's politikos, it's the republic virtues of being a good citizen. And so that goes from the civic, so read from the civic virtues down to public association and community.
Okay. So, the civic virtues, which is the same as political, right? Um, Based as they are on moderation of the passions, that's what they're based in, okay, consist in following and going along with the process of reasoning, with the process of reasoning relative to our duty in the field of practical action. For this reason, since they have regard to a community of action that avoids doing harm to one's neighbors, they are called civic. This is like civic meaning something like neighbors, I'm not sure. By reason of their concern with public associations and community, they are as
Okay,
follows. Okay,
you
that's
can stop there. Yeah. So, yeah, so I mean, civic translates here politikos, and politikos has to do with the city, the polis, right? So they're proper to life in the polis. So first he says, yeah, based as they are in moderation of the passions. So you remember that this is this was an issue that Tinus raised with these, and why they were, so to speak, perfect virtues, is because they involve measuring our passions, bringing them, into certain bounds or certain rules. They're the ones that, for instance, Aristotle advocates in the Nicomachean Ethics, where it's a matter of not it's not never being angry, it's knowing how to be angry and when to be angry and against who to be angry and so on. So you're not simply rejecting the passions, you are shaping them. And so because of that, you're always tied to the body in some sense. right? Because you're working on the body and its passions. Um, and and he phrases it as, following our reasoning. And he said, how do they put the here in the translation? Following, going along with the process of reasoning relative to our duty in the field of practical action. So this relative to our duty is to kathekontos, and that has to do, that was a term that was very important for Stoic ethics. And it has to do with the idea that, each person has their own duties that are determined by their situation and who they are in life, right? So, like, for instance, a father has to take care of his children. Children have to obey their father. If you have a job, be, teacher or fireman or soldier, you have certain duties that you have to fulfill. Um, and and so that's that. And also, it's emphasis here. He uses logismoi, our reasoning. So this is uh, something else that indicates that this is in some sense a lower level of soul. Is that what you're basing your action on is reasoning and deliberation, and not some kind of insight into the truth. Right? It's not exercising your nous. It's exercising your dianoia. Um, and then he gives an explanation for why they're called politicae, why they're called civic in this translation, or political. Of course, civic is just political, but from the Latin root, right? Civitas for city. So there, one word is a translation of the other. Um, and so here, this is something interesting. So Plotinus doesn't give this explanation for why they're called political virtues. And as we saw, he's drawing on passages in Plato, where Plato sometimes doesn't even recognize these things as virtues. Like, for instance, in the Phaedo or in the Theaetetus, when he calls things political virtues, it seems he's saying, "Oh, these are just like what people think is nice, but it's not real virtue." Right. Although in the Republic, it seems to be true virtue. He's saying there it's that discussion of courage, where he says, um, well, he's trying to define courage, and someone says that it's like, yeah, just obeying. Okay, I guess it's just like obeying reason. And then he says, well, that might be that's good enough for our discussion. If we wanted to discuss what courage is in itself, we'd have to do have a whole other discussion, but that's enough for us. So there seems to be a use of political virtue that's recognized as proper virtue. But anyway, Porphyry feels like he has to give an explanation. And then he says that um, they have regard to a community of action that avoids doing harm to one's neighbors, and by reason of their concern with public association and community. That seems fine. That seems also to tie in with him bringing in this idea of duty, because then precisely if each person does their job, whatever their duties are, then presumably, no one gets in anyone's way. That's already anticipating Plato's idea of justice. Um, and yeah, so and it also, it shows also that they're not concerned, for instance, with each person taking care of their own soul, right? They're concerned with not harming each other, and that's also why, you're not actually trying to get away um from your passions. You're just um putting them underneath a leash. You're just moderating them, controlling them. Um, and presumably with an eye to the common good. The translators point out, and this is true, that the word that they translate here as public association is sun agilasmu, which is actually like herding together. And This recalls in Plato's Statesman. He has this first definition of the statesman of the politikos, right? That's politic, the city person is the statesman in Greek. So in and the first definition is that he's a herder of men. Plato doesn't like this definition. He rejects it because he thinks that that would only apply to some kind of divine ruler that, fed us and gave us everything we need, and we wouldn't have to, have any initiative at all. We wouldn't have to govern ourselves. But here he's applying to Porphyry seems to be applying it to real people that they're somehow herded together, and the distinction here between the herding together and community, a sort of public association and community there, could have could be some kind of class distinction, I imagine. Something that like he's thinking that, the lower classes in the Republic, the producers, maybe he sees them as more closer to the appetites, and so sees them as being more herded together. Whereas the free people, the governors, they have community. Remember also the community of goods in the Republic that, they have. They not the guardians have not only their all their property in common, but also like their wives and their families in common. That's proper only to the ruling class, right? Whereas it's not true of the whole city. So maybe that's the distinction being made here between public association and community. So the concern for public association then would be the concern for herding together the lower classes, and community is the unity of the higher classes. This unity of the higher classes that they share everything together in Plato is because he says these people rule, and we have to avoid them ruling in their own self-interest, right? Their self-interest has to be the self-interest of the city. And so one way of doing this is for them to not have any personal property, right? Um, so that's why he's particularly concerned about them sharing all things. But so these are some yeah, elements of Plato's political theory that Porphyry might be bringing in when he discusses these political virtues. But otherwise, so you see, it's more detailed than what Plotinus is, but the center, what they are based on, moderation of the passions, that's very much how Plotinus described described them. Um, do you want to continue? You can read to the
Yeah,
end of the
sure. So
you can read
then,
to the end of the
there as follows. Okay, I'm gonna go to the next page. There as follows. These are the virtues of the civic virtues. So we defined them, and now we're giving the how do you call it? The details
yeah.
of the civic virtues. Okay, they are wisdom relative to the reasoning element in the soul, which is okay. That's the kind of wisdom that they have. Courage relative. Wait. Relative to the spirited element, right? Moderation, which consists in the agreement and harmony of the effective elements with reason.
Mhm.
And justice, consisting of each of the elements in the soul in its performance of its proper role with respect to ruling and being ruled. So these were the Republic's definitions, basically, right?
That's exactly the Republic definitions. I mean, yeah. So, and it's important here that, so wisdom here is he uses phronesis, and so that's precisely often contrasted, especially after Aristotle. Phronesis is practical wisdom, and whereas it's opposed to Sophia or nous, which would be theoretical wisdom, right? And so here is it's practical wisdom, and it's relative to precisely the reasoning element. So again, not nous, not a faculty for insight, but a faculty for making art, for giving and responding to reasons, and to articulating chains of thought. And so that's it, right? Yeah, so this is just basically uh the Republic. He expands a bit that, the each one doing its own part, the justice, um, where he says that it's uh, consisting in for each of the elements in the soul in its performance of its proper role with respect to ruling and being ruled. So there's that added with respect to ruling and being ruled. So it's not just, that each one does what it's supposed to. So for instance, that the spirited element, so that's the one that takes care of the image we have of ourselves. So if we think someone has offended us, that's that we get angry, but if someone praises us, we get happy. And so this concern with one's own image is what the spirited element is about. And um yeah, so so here he's saying, that justice isn't just the spirited element doing what it does, presumably because it could do some other thing, but also, it's being in the right or it's being in the right political relations with the other part, so that it obeys reasoning and it commands the appetites, something like that. Okay, so now he's going to explain the next level of virtues, and that's this whole next paragraph.
Okay. So that's this level, and we're done. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, the virtues on the other hand, okay, the next one of the human being. Like this is where like the big distinction between philosophers and normal people starts. Like in some sense, the if in these which is also part of the class in the Republic, sort of. Like the lower class needs only the civic virtues, maybe also the middle class, like it's only the
Yes.
ruling class which are going to go on to the next level of virtue, right?
Yes. Yeah.
The virtues, on the other hand, of a human being who is making progress towards the state of contemplation consist in detaching oneself from the things of this realm. This is the detaching. For this
Right.
reason, these are also termed purifications, consisting in abstention from action in concert with the body and participating in the passions that affect it. Okay, four. Without doubt, these virtues are those of a soul that is in the process of separating itself from the body and separating itself from the body in the direction of true being. Whereas the civic virtues are concerned with the imposition of order on man in his mortal state. The civic virtues, okay, the civic virtues we should specify are precursors of the purifications, for it is only after one has been set in order in accordance with them that one can abstract oneself from performing any acting concerned primarily with the body.
Right.
Not sure why that is.
Right. And he'll return to the question about so Plotinus ended his treatise with his question, if you have the higher virtues, do you also have the lower virtues? And we saw that he didn't really give a good answer to that. Um, whereas Porphyry will later address this issue head on, but he's already addressing it here. This thing that they are also termed purifications. That's in the Phaedo, right? In the Phaedo, Plato says that clearly every virtue is a purification,
Mm.
and um, and and so yeah, so this is already a process of separating yourself from the body in the direction of true being, and you see a distinction in how they're defined. Because although at the beginning he says that this is, well, actually, when he adds when the human being at the beginning, the virtues on the other hand of the human being who is making progress towards the state of contemplation, that of the human being is not in the Greek. It's the one who is making progress toward the state of contemplation. And that's important because later, when he contrasts the two, he says that these are the virtues of a soul. that is in the process of separating itself, whereas the civic virtues are concerned with the imposition of order on man in his mortal state. So it seems that, the proper subject um, of of these virtues is the soul, whereas the proper subject of the political virtues is the man, so the soul with the body. Um, and uh, yes, it's yeah, there's something interesting here about how the word that he uses to for the order, the imposition of order on man, that's katakosmousi. So it's actually like it is ordering, but there's this word cosmos, right? So to do it both with beauty and also, of course, the world. So you're in some sense, adapting him to the world or ordering him the way the world is ordered. Um, and so that's the thing. Now, your question at the end, right? You asked this question about why do you have to be have for it is only why is this the case? For it is only after one has been set in order in accordance with them that one can abstract oneself from performing any act in concert primarily with the body. Um, Presumably I mean, one thing is that if you if you act out of passion, that is by definition, and so like if you act out of passion, so if you act in a way that isn't conform to the political virtues, right? So it would be like a vice even for the political virtues, then um, the who does that is definitely the embodied soul is definitely the man. Um, s- uh, because you would the dominant element, to use the language of 3/4, there is the body. And so if you aspire to be someone who the agent of your actions is always the soul by itself and never the embodied soul, so to speak, then certainly you can't have actions that are driven by the passions, right? So that would be one argument for um, uh, for that view.
Okay, but
Um,
now we discussed this a little, right? Because uh, there still might like be specific duties that don't seem to be necessary. Like it's like say someone has like a duty as a soldier to be a good soldier or something, uh, and he would say, well, no, like okay, maybe that's because like you could say, okay, well, Plato says that a good soldier has courage, or like even civic courage, which at least means like leashing or restraining your fears and self-interest and stuff like that. Um, so if you don't have courage in the civic way, then yes, you will be like a worse person, more connected to the body. So you obviously won't be able to be purified. But someone might like refuse to be a soldier in a not civic, and not in a not civic vice way, right? You could say like, well, I don't really care enough about this state winning or something that I should be the soldier, and because I'm a philosopher, like because I care only about the universe or something. And then he would not be a civically virtuous person, but he seems like would be able to be a philosopher.
Ah, okay, in that sense. Yeah, but it would seem that if you huh, um there are a couple of ways to go about this. One is, of course, that to detach yourself from your ties to your family and your community already seems quite a huge detachment. Um, and and then if you're just detached from those passions is, you are a fortiori, they're under control. They're not going to overcome you, right? The you know there might be a Platonic view that if you're a soldier, you can never actually become a proper philosopher because you're always going to be bound to these bodily things, right? Just by your function. There are ways of pushing back against that, but that might be a concern. And then, I think the typically if Porphyry were to think of someone who, refuses to serve because they're a citizen of the world or something like that, he would say, well, this is already a case of moderation, or even something more than moderation is detachment, because you're not like tied by these bounds to these emotional ties to your family and and the place you come from. But of course you could say, well, but no, you can just rage quit, right? You can be mad at your family, and that's why you left, and so on. And but then in that case, I guess it would be a case that's that wouldn't be even a politically virtuous person, and that wouldn't be a person with purificatory virtue either, right?
Hmm.
Because that person is actually like maybe you meet this person in your travels, and they say, ah, I left my country because who cares, or like, or we have to consider the world, and not our individual states, and so on. And talking to them, it could be clear to you that this person thinks that they are some kind of very pure philosopher, but what moves them is actually, rage at their parents. So you wouldn't, Porphyry wouldn't say, "Oh, this guy is practicing purifying virtue." Um,
Okay. Mm.
um,
There's still like a question, I think. Okay.
sure, sure, sure.
Um,
You can, uh, well, there's one more paragraph on these
like
virtues.
it's I like I find yeah, it's interesting. Okay. No, I just asked the question because it's like a real political question that seems to exist.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem to like really be resolved.
So,
Like from this
I mean,
perspective, something like yeah, mm, okay, like now that there's all these discussions of circles of concern and are you even allowed to fight for your group against another group and stuff like that. But um if we talk about like this kind of virtue, it's something like, well, you could probably make the case that most of the people who claim to be this cosmopolitans are really cowards, but that would be like some kind of like suspicion of them, right? It's not, they don't claim to be cowards. They claim to be like even more courageous, right? We have a moral courage to then refuse to serve or something like that. And it's really hard to distinguish like who is just a coward who uses using that as an excuse and who isn't.
right. But I mean, as long as we're talking about this, like, are these people? So I mean, so if these people have like a moral courage, I mean, and they mean something like that, we have the courage to follow our principles, to stick to our principles, and not obey the state, or the people who want to go to war and things like that. That's still on the level of political virtue, right? That's a discussion about what is the proper exercise, because that's still,
Hmm.
my spirited part obeying my reasoning part, right? Um, and what Porphyry is saying here is that if you want to, and it could indeed be that, and so like that's not a discussion that this scale of virtues gets into, right? What exactly is the proper exercise of each of these kinds of virtues? But when he's saying um, that in order for you to act without the body, you have to already be acting political, in a moderate way, um, he he's saying that this it's a whole like in order for you to, for instance, hmm, in order for you to act in a way as a soul and no longer as a human being, you can't be determined by your passions because the passions certainly determine only human beings, people with bodies. And it could be, for instance, that in a certain context, being determined by your passions is refusing to fight, and it could be that in a certain context, being determined by your passions is fighting. Right? Both could be the case. This doesn't uh, tie to that. And but in either case, well, you have to be making the right call with regard to that before you start, aspiring to, you know, detach yourself entirely from the passions.
Okay. I see. And now this is like the answer because you will need, like, the question I'm asking is really a question within the political realm. Like, what is the correct politics? And maybe there's like a cosmopolitan politics somehow. That's a question. Like, could there be such a thing? Maybe yes, maybe not. But uh, what he is saying is really that if you are being, if you are just a coward, then you for sure won't be a philosopher. Okay.
Yeah,
Whatever, then what a coward is a different discussion. Like we'd have to do a really political discussion. And
yeah,
it's not, it doesn't, it isn't like, he wouldn't say that the like higher politics could determine anything about that. It would have to be a separate discussion. Like you would have to ask whoever knows practical wisdom. It's not a question for separate wisdom or nous.
yeah, yeah. No, I think that's the case. Mhm. So now in the following paragraph, he will give again the four cardinal virtues, but they are purificatory virtues.
Okay. Now, for this reason, um, at the purificatory level, practical wisdom consists of the soul. So now there's a new meaning of that, of the soul not sharing any opinions with the body, but acting on its own. And this is perfected by the pure exercise of the intellect. Um, and this is a different kind of. It's not practical. Mm, we discussed this. This is like
Um,
a
so
non-practical practical wisdom, or
Right. So before he says that practical wisdom was concerned the reasoning part. And here now it's not sharing any opinions with the body and um, the um, yeah, the the pure nous acting on its own. Um, so yeah, as non-practical practical. Um, I don't know. So it's like you uh, you still have to make, I guess, that you still need practical wisdom at this stage. For instance, for you to um say this uh um this is just a distraction. I'm not going to pursue that. Like this is just something that my body likes, but I'm not going to pursue that. So this thing of saying, "Oh, this is my body and not me." He's going to give like some practical advice later in this sentence about, for instance, you should avoid pain, and even if but if pain is unavoidable, you should understand that it's just something that your body is going through. It's something minor. and and things like you should never willingly get angry or willingly entertain sexual desire. It should just be something that happens, but it can happen involuntarily, but not something you should invest in or something. Um, so here there is some kind of practical wisdom, for instance, some judging of your desires, but it's um it's not colored. You don't take what your body informs you. You don't take the pleasures and pains of your body as telling you anything about what's good or evil. Whereas in when you're just measuring your just moderating your passions, you still do, take care of your take into account pains and pleasures. For instance, you will not overeat because you know that later, if you overeat, you'll feel bad later and you won't be able to work properly. And so that is, as the Phaedo says, it's trading pains for pains and pleasures for pleasures. Because you say, "Oh, I'm going to have pains in the future, so I will avoid this tempting pleasure now." Um, so so yeah, I mean there is still some room for practical wisdom here.
Uh-huh, okay.
Um, okay. Did that work as an explanation of why he's talking about
Yeah,
practical
yeah.
wisdom?
Yeah, I guess. It's practical in the sense of still, I mean, in the sense of being in the sense of being related to like I guess the way we're saying it now, it's judging or deciding about the same activities, like both of these levels. Like there's two different reasons why not to overeat, and that's the difference. The political reason is you don't overeat because you won't be healthy and it would cause you pain and stuff like that, and the purificatory reason is you don't overeat because you sort of don't really eat at all unless it's necessary or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Moderation, then, yeah, and then all the things become the same thing, though, right? Moderation is the result of taking care not to assent to any of the passions. That's just what we just said, basically. Like, it's not really different.
R- right. Yeah, this is uh so I think it's not to share in any passions. So I guess yeah, so the wisdom part is framed cognitively. It's not sharing opinions. And now it's not sharing passions. So I guess yeah, I mean you could say those two things go together, but but maybe not. Maybe maybe it's actually easier for you to do the wisdom bit of like not sharing the opinions of your body and saying like that's really tempting, but unfortunately, that's uh something that's really tempting for my body. I just eat what's necessary. But not even sharing the passion would be something like it's um it's like I guess you wouldn't even be tempted, right? Yeah.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Right. Are these like divisions? Do they still correspond to the four parts of the soul here? Like
Uh-huh.
moderation is still belong to the appetitive faculty or something, or
So
because the
probably not.
Plato doesn't believe in parts of the soul.
Probably not because these parts of the soul are really connected to the fact that the soul is embodied. And that's actually one of the distinctions. If we think that the political virtues are the republic virtues and the purificatory virtues are the Phaedo virtues, the Phaedo has a simple soul, right? It's like one of uh, the distinctions between the Phaedo and the republic. Phaedo really insists on the simplicity of the soul. Um, so yeah, it's no longer parts of the soul, and that's also like a reason why these things are like the the distinctions between the, we'll see this also even more in the next two levels, but the distinctions between the virtues kind of start to collapse. This also corresponds to the, um, what was I going to say? This also corresponds to the Platonic doctrine of the unity of the virtues, right? The Socratic idea that you don't really have any virtues if you don't have all of them, right? So that's also why you can also see these things as just four aspects of the same state, same of the same dispositions. Okay, so that's moderation.
Okay, moderation is there. Okay, so right, but it's sort of as long as we're talking about a human being who's alive, it would still like sort of be the virtue related to his like appetite, if just
Yeah,
not a virtue of it or something like that.
right. Yeah.
Um,
Well,
okay,
I guess yeah, because this virtue of the appetite is practically that the appetite hardly functions, right? That would be the virtue, right?
right, but it still functions in some sense. It's just not we don't care about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Courage is not being afraid to depart from the body, as if one were falling into some void of not being. That's the fear of people who think that they're the body, so they will stop existing when they die. But since you're not the body, then you don't stop uh,
Yeah.
existing when you die. Okay. And it's again, if we're talking about a living person, it would be like another reason to not be afraid to go to war or something, like a different motivation. Uh,
Right, right. And the right, and so that's also why, for instance, you have like in the symposium, Alcibiades mentions that, Socrates was at a battle and in the middle of the battle, he just stands still and because a thought has occurred to him and he stays standing still in the middle of the battle. So you can have, philosophers in a battlefield and presumably he's not afraid to die if he's just standing still in the middle of battle. And right, and then again, just to contrast with the civic virtue, right? The civic virtue is not that you're not afraid to die, but that you will do whatever is good, and that means even facing death if that's necessary, because there's something more important, right? There's this good. Whereas here, it's really thinking death is nothing. I'm a soul, right?
Yeah, it's complicated because after you're dead, you don't have any civic virtue, so it's only good for the community or something.
Right. Yeah.
That's why we have to lie to them and tell them that they're gonna have a soul, according to the Republic or
Uh,
something.
what? Oh, like right,
Like the Republic
because
does, I don't remember, doesn't exactly do that, right? But like, how does he get the soldiers to die by some kind of, oh, he gives promises them the honors and stuff. They do them something
exactly.
like that.
Yeah, he promises them honors and so on because he also thinks that this is what courage is about, right? This the thumos it responds to your self-image, right? It's to honors and punishments and things like that.
Ah, so right, so
So you're um so precisely the all right, we can think about this in parallel to the appetite. So just as like um the civic moderation is you keep you contrast pleasures with pleasures and pains with pains, and you make a calculus, and so you keep your appetites in check. But the purificatory form is that you just don't care about your appetites. The civic um, the civic courage is that you kind of like you again you compare of like how will people talk about me if I do this and how will people talk about me if I do that, and you decide to act well because you think, well, something like the best praise is the praise of reason, right? And so if I act properly, then reason will praise me, so I'll be brave now and obey what reason tells me to do. Whereas here, it's like when I die, through my soul goes on, and I die, and like this self-image that I have now will perish, or because, the soul will go on to give life to other beings, right? And so like the fame of this mortal man doesn't isn't my fame at all, right? So here you're saying, yeah, just as before, just the purificatory moderation is not to care about your appetites. Here, the purificatory courage is not to care about your fame. Right.
Right. And sort of so it's right. So it very well relates like to the thumos in the same way. Like someone would die in battle, which is like, well, it might be disgrace now, but you're gonna get a big monument soon. And for some reason, people care about monuments when they're dead, but that's a different problem. And the purificatory way would say like monuments don't matter, and dying doesn't matter either, because the problem here with dying is something like it's a disgrace, and who cares about that?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so that's courage. And justice, which was all only like the coordination of everything, is the result of reason and intellect dominating the soul with nothing to oppose them. Right. Justice
Yeah.
is nothing. It's always nothing anyways, but it only makes sense in the political world where like this is the whole republic's theory, where like we need everything to do its part and everything. And if there's no part, then justice doesn't seem to do anything. This was the question of Plotinus about, well, about moderation and stuff in the world soul and stuff, since there's nothing against it and doesn't really have that virtue.
Exactly. Yeah. So here it would be probably something like, yeah, again, the purificatory form is related to the parts of the soul, just in the sense that the parts of the soul are no longer seen as parts of the soul. The soul is not invested in them. They're just seen as, it's just the body, and something like that. Yeah. So it's this massive disinvestment from the body. Okay. Um,
So it's, oh wait, so it's kind the, again, if we're talking about a living person, it would be something like, well, he has this like civic soul, um, but he dominates it by the reason and intellect, and therefore it's justice in the sense of,
it's it's justice in the sense that it is as like it's the political constitution of the soul. It's like the order of things in the soul. So in the order um of the political soul, the let's say the other parts of the soul, they have a voice, right? They don't have the last voice, right? So the you do, your appetites tell you let you know like in the future what your pleasures and pains will be, and then that's important for reason to calculate pleasures and pains. And your thumos will tell you, what's offensive to you, and what's and what flatters you, and you use that in calculating what you should do. But ultimately, who determines what's going to happen is the reasoning element. Now, in the case of the purificatory virtues, the other parts of the soul, they don't even have a voice. Like it's just noise. Like this stuff about, oh, I feel good now, I feel bad later. Oh, I'm offended. Oh, I'm flattered. That's just noise for the purificatory soul. These people don't have a voice. It's an absolute monarchy. You just do what reason tells you.
okay. So they're right. So they're not parts. They're not political parts. Like they're
Yeah.
okay. In brief,
They're all
my,
they're almost like they're external things. It's noise, like it's not even something inside you. It's just
mhm. Okay. In brief, the disposition characteristic of the civic virtues is to be seen as the imposition of measure. Okay, so this is going back to the difference between civic virtues and purificatory virtues. And in several virtues, it's to be seen as the imposition of measure on the passion, since it has as its aim living human life in just in accordance with nature, while the disposition that results from the contemplative virtues is manifested in total detachment from the passions, which has as its aim assimilation to God.
Right. And remember, so that was like the starting point for Plotinus 1-2. What is this? What does it mean to escape this world? It means becoming like God. How do you become like God? You become like God through the virtues. Um, and and again, he uses this. You see that here there's still this ambiguity between is it purificatory or is it contemplative, right? They're called the virtues here are called purifications, but they're proper to the person who is becoming contemplative, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay, so now he's going to actually give a whole discussion about the distinction between purificatory and contemplative, and why there needs to be a further level of further level of virtue that's distinct from the purificatory.
Wait, what just happened? Give me 1 second. Lost here. Okay. Okay. Let's continue here. I don't wait, my document is flying away. Okay, but now, since purification can mean, as we know, in one sense, the process of purifying a soul. Okay, this is right. This is going to move us from the second to the third thing, right? Purification, it goes something like this. Like the first, we made a difference between the two meanings of virtue. Something like one is, which is distinguished by the what kind of thing it is, which is the first civic virtue is the kind is an imposition of measure, and the contemplative virtue is a detachment, and they also distinguish by their aims. One
Mhm.
has as its aim a human life in accordance with nature. Not really sure what that is, anyways. And the other has its aim. So basically, a good life in this world, but I'm not sure. Like that's what the nature means, something like naturally, not and as opposed to supernaturally or
Ye-
something, which is.
Yeah, I think it's like say like, it can be something like according to human nature, and then you'll, for instance, remember, for instance, Aristotle's argument in the Nicomachean Ethics, the ergon argument. So he asks, what is the function of human beings? We look for what's unique to human beings and all the animals, and it's that fact that they exercise nous or something like that. And so that could be, and um, it, yeah, and that's probably it. There might be also something connected here with this catafusian will come up again later. Um, So it could also be something connected with the fact that, Fusius in the sense of generation. And so it could be, you're tied to the fact of reproduction and the fact that the city has to go on, the community has to keep existing, so on.
Hmm.
Yes. Mm. But there is also this contrast between the human life according to nature, and so that also has to do with birth and reproduction, and on the other hand, the assimilation to God. So there's these thing that you have to lead a more than human life. And this might remind you of the passages in Aristotle where he says, we should not listen to those people who tell us that we mortals should only think mortal thoughts, but rather we should aspire as much as possible to think the immortal thoughts and to act, act like a god, and so on. And there, you might be thinking that who is it? I think is it Euripides? I might have the tragedian wrong, but there's a tragedy, the Heracles, where or is it in the Alcest? It's in the Alcest, Alcestis, where Hercules appears and he gives this speech about, like um drink and have sex and enjoy your life because who knows when you're gonna die. And he explicitly there says, this is proper to mortal people. And because so mortal people should have mortal thoughts and they should, just care about the instant. And so of course that would already be against political virtue, but here there's this but in any case there is this question about assimilating yourself to God is in some sense going beyond your status as a human being, right? In the case of the tragedy, it's in the context of, don't try to become like a god. That's like the worst thing you can do because you'll just invite tragedy. And
Right. And we
right.
discussed this once that how
Yeah.
Plato inverted that sort of and said that we should try
Yeah.
to become like God and that that is virtuous.
Yeah.
Okay. So then right, and then the like second level comes out of sort of dividing the meaning of purification. Uh
Mhm.
does that make sense? Like we once
The
split
the
me
the
we
third
divided.
level.
Yeah, like the
Yeah.
first and second are split by the meaning of virtue or something like that, and its aim. And the second one is not like we got this idea of purification is like escaping the world, and then that is gets split into two meanings, that something like
Yeah,
two stages.
that that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
Um, okay,
And yeah.
this wasn't Plotinus, but I'm just
Yeah, yeah, and I think you can later say that the distinction between the third and the fourth comes between comes from two meanings of contemplation. So just as purification can mean the process of purifying yourself or being pure, then being pure turns out to contemplating. But then when you think about contemplating, you can think about what the contemplator is doing, the subjective activity, or the revelation of the contemplated object, right? And so that divides again into two.
hmm okay. So that okay. But since purification can mean as we know, in once as we know, I don't know because we read Plotinus or something. In one sense, the process
I,
of
I,
pure from Plato from somewhere.
I think it's just Greek. I think this word purification, catharsis, can mean either the process or the result. Okay.
Oh,
Right.
okay. Okay. In one sense, the process of purifying a soul, and in another, the state, well, it would be like purification and purity or something. The state of achieved by purified souls.
Yeah.
Now, so therefore, the purificatory virtues can be viewed in accordance with either of these two meanings of purification. In fact, they
Mhm.
both serve to purify the soul. So they do both actually. They both serve to
Mhm.
purify the soul and are an accompaniment to the purified soul. For the aim of the process of purification is the state of purification. So yeah, I don't see the previous line. They're purify and are an accompaniment. I don't know what this accompaniment would mean. Um,
Um, I guess the thing is this, whatever helped you to become pure is still with you when you've become pure,
hmm,
right? It's in a way he's saying that thing that The higher virtue, the completed virtue, includes the lower virtue, the virtue of the process.
I mean, again, it seems only in like some sense, right? Uh, because like I don't know, maybe there's like some ritual that you need to do to purify, but then once you're pure, you don't. It's just like about the definition, right? For
Right. Um, uh, we can we can get to that later.
okay, for the aim of the let's finish this paragraph.
Yeah.
For the aim of the process of purification is the state of purification. Okay, but since the process of purification and the state of purity are as is agreed. So now what's the meaning of them? The suppression of what is alien. Therefore, the good will be distinct from the purifying agent. Okay,
Right.
what is that?
Um, yeah, or the purifying agent, you could also translate that as the one who's purifying themselves. Could also be that. Um, but so the point here is that since it's a negative activity, it's removing the alien thing, then it's distinct from the positive thing, like the good that remains after you've purified it, after you've removed things. Right. Does that make sense?
I'm confused if he wants to say that it's the same or that it's different. So again,
It
there's
wants
two
this.
meanings. There's two meanings of purification. So we can
Hmm.
understand it in both ways. But it's not that way because there's a process and I don't know why there's suppression of what is alien. So because something like the because the process of purification like has to do with the alien things.
Um, yeah. Uh, so so he wants to distinguish here between the good and the and the pure and he wants to distinguish between the good and the pure, right? Because the pure is without alien things, and the good is something positive. Don't know what it is yet. Um, and and so he's saying in yeah, he's introducing this distinction. He's not distinguishing here. I mean, what is confusing here is that he started out with this distinction between the process and the state, but now he seems to be ignoring the that distinction because he's saying both about the process and the state.
Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, it could be that he's using this. I mean, that he's using this precisely to perhaps start distinguishing between the process and the state. Because if the process is just removing what's alien, then the final state should be something like possession of the good, right? Um, it's you can think of it in terms of Aristotle's distinction between a process, a kinesis, a change, and an activity, an energia. Because he says that a process is something that you never say the perfect and the present at the same time. So you'd never say that a house is being built and it's been built at the same time. No, it's either being built or it's been built. Whereas an activity is something that you say both of them at the same time. For instance, you know and you have known at the same time. You see and you have seen at the same time. Um, and here he's saying, well, the since to purify yourself is to remove what's alien, then at that the process has to be distinct from the end goal. Because the end goal just there just won't be anything alien for you to remove. You'll just have the good.
Hmm. Let me try to read it. I'm not entirely sure. For um, maybe we'll finish the finish and we'll see. For if in fact what is purified were good before its loss of purity. So okay, I'm gonna think the whole thing and see. Then purification alone would be sufficient. Okay, so maybe there's just a subtractive process, and then you would only need to remove what is alien. But if purification is going to be sufficient, what remains afterwards will be the good, not the purification. Yeah, that makes sense. But purification is the name of a process. That's like the weird thing. Or it's no, or it's the name of the state of not having anything alien mixed in or something.
It
Like
seems
that's
like here,
again because of this like ambiguity that he starts off with between purification and purity, which is not the same thing. He starts saying that it's the same thing, but I don't know why. And then
yeah.
it's
So
not the same.
here in this context, in these sentences, it seems that purification is the process, and he's saying that um, okay, like you would just need to purify yourself if you were intrinsically good, and then if you just removed what's alien, then you'd be good immediately, right?
Right.
And it would be one and the same thing.
But the soul is not by its nature good, but something that can participate in the good and is within the class of the good. For otherwise, it could not have come to be in an evil state. The
Right.
good for it then consists in uniting itself with what has engendered it, while evil lies in uniting itself to what is inferior to it. Evil, it should be
Uh,
specified. Wow, this goes on to all kind of things.
um, yeah. So this here is perhaps so he says, you know, purification would be enough if we were intrinsically good. We're not intrinsically good because we can also be evil. What does evil mean? Evil means uniting yourself to what is inferior to you. And good is uniting to what generated you. He doesn't give an argument for this here, but I mean we saw Proclus mentions the standard argument a couple of times in the elements. So there the idea is for the goodness of a being is for it to be fully what it is, right? For it to flourish. And and so that means that it has to, as it were, receive more being. It has to be more itself, but it is itself by its cause. So how it becomes good must be by returning or joining or turning to its cause, because that's where it gets its being, and that's where it will get its maximal being, and its maximal being is the goodness for it. Um, Whereas turning to what's inferior to it, you know, that doesn't quite explain why turning to what's inferior um, uh, is evil, but presumably, since nothing can generate what it comes from, um, at least like there's this idea that causality is linear. So if you turn to the things that are inferior to you, you're turning to things that can never actually give you being, right? And in that sense, uh, you're not proceeding towards having a maximal being. Yeah. And that's why it's evil. Um, but yeah, so this is actually like the condensed argument for why um, purification is not enough, but you need something more than purification. We saw this also in Plotinus, right? It's not enough to purify yourself. You also have to turn towards nous. There's also this positive thing. Here he hasn't specified is that nous yet, but just turning towards your origin. And and so that's but still there needs this complement. Why? Because the soul is not naturally good.
Okay, so this whole thing of purific, like this is where I'm not. Let's see if I could read the whole thing and make sense. Uh, there's these two senses of purification, and We need to know which we're talking about when we talk about purification, I guess. So, um, therefore, uh, and it gets somehow to this thing where he adds something that now what does purification mean? Okay, everyone like just I'm trying to like follow the reasoning. Just the like definition of purification gives us these two stages or two parts, which is like the process and the result or the state.
Right.
Now we don't know what the process is. What purification is? It is it is a suppression of alien things. Now, that leads us to showing that purification can't be enough because just going away from alien things isn't going to make you good. Because, and there's a fourth step, like, because, how do we know that? Because uh, we're talking about something becoming good, and it doesn't make sense to talk about something becoming good if it would already be good. Or does that make sense?
Right, and also to so I mean, we can spell out a bit more like, okay, well, what is the process of purification? It's this process of detaching yourself from your passions. But um, detaching yourself from your passions isn't enough to make you good because you're just something that's capable of being good. Why do we know that you're something capable of being good and you're not intrinsically good? It's because you've done evil. So the what's implicit here is that he rejects an explanation of evil action, saying, "Oh, it wasn't me, it was just my passions, my body, the evil element in me that took over me." Right? Well, I'm always, I'm perfect, but my body is bad, and it was the agent of that. No, when people, kill each other and get angry and get and overreact and get super angry at their relatives and all that, it's them that's doing it, right? It's the soul has done that action, and so the soul can be evil. And so this is actually like the Augustine's argument against the Manichees, right? Or rather, Augustine is getting the Plotinian argument, right? Because that's where Augustine learned it from. So, and saying, no, um, you really are responsible for the evil that you do, and therefore, if purification is not enough, you also have to turn towards the good, right?
And then, so, uh, purificatories.
So, I'm not sure if this will be unfair to the Manichees. But one way of thinking about this is also like it seems that at least in Augustine's depiction that there are two grades of Manichees. There are these super ascetic people that they live by a bunch of rules, and so they've purified themselves and they live a purificatory life and they lead pure lives. And then there were the people who liked the Manichae doctrine, but they never took it on themselves to do all that. And so there's just two levels. Here, Plotinus is saying, actually, like a moral community that aspires to true virtue will have at least one other level, because there still be the people, for instance, who have not only purified themselves, but are also, say, now using their pure state to just study all the time or something like that, like do philosophy. Right? It's not enough for people. You can't say people have achieved moral perfection because they have purified themselves. They're distinct from their bodies they all actually have to show that they're doing something that they've returned to their nous, that they've returned to their origin, and are, presumably then producing things talking about their origin and things like that.
Right. I didn't get, but why? Like, what was the proof that the soul isn't itself good and all the bad things just come from something else?
Well, he didn't give a full proof, but the proof here, but it's basically the insistence that we're responsible for the evil things we do. That's basically it. And it's wrong to say that we are somehow compelled into evil by our bodies. Right? Um, I don't know. I tend to think the my body made me do it is the thing is the weirder position that we need that has the burden of proof. But
I guess, but it seems like a lot of people like. mm, well, we're in weird. Like weird doesn't work in Platonism. No, I mean to say, because he does talk about purification, right? This is where the problem comes. Like there's he said he had this like okay, there's civic virtue, which is just what Aristotle knows, which sort of makes sense. You need to be self-controlled or something. Then we say, well, you also need to not disidentify with the body entirely. And maybe really this doesn't, maybe what he's saying here is that that doesn't really make sense. There needs to be a for that, right? You need to disidentify with your body for something. Now, the for could have been that this is really maybe what's going on. This for could have been to be good, right? That would be the Manichaean position. Something like, well, you you claim that you're going to be good just like by eating the correct amount and stuff. But no, as long as you eat, that is the reason why you eat too much. And in order to become basically good, you need to separate from the body. Does that make sense? And here, really, it's turned this like third step is necessary for the purificatory virtues to not be the needed for the civic virtues or to be distinct, really. Because he's saying, no, you need to purify to turn to the good, but not to be good in a simple sense. This is not
right.
Augustine doesn't really agree with this because he does think that you need to be turned to nous or to whatever to just to be good in a simple sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's then yeah, there's yeah. Then there are Christian ideas that like everyone should be a philosopher. That get in the way.
Right, and
I
they,
think that
but because they sort of think like, well, you can't overcome your temptations otherwise.
right. And also like yeah, the and yeah, and like for like the Christians have this idea that, all vice should disappear at some point. Whereas, of course, Plotinus doesn't think that because he thinks that otherwise the world wouldn't have animals
Hmm.
and plants. So they don't share this idea that everyone should become a philosopher. Um, the now here in uh yeah, so you can say that yeah, you need to have, as it were, something higher in order to explain why purification is not enough for just goodness to show that there's actually something uh yeah, you are there's like a goal for the purification, right? A further goal.
Okay, it's 11:30 if you want to know.
Oh, yeah. So let's stop here. So he stopped in the middle of this paragraph,
Yeah, we'll get back
and
because I
oh
almost
well,
really
yeah.
missed
But
out.
I think yeah, one or yeah, but I don't think the text will take us that many sessions, but
Okay.
we'll see. Good.
Okay.
Well, have a nice week. Till next week.
Yeah, should be fine
Yeah.
next week. Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Great. Have a good one.
Have a good
Bye.
week.